Okay, Jesse, this is the Halo Longhand video, and I've got less than 30 minutes before we close, so let's keep it brief. So, the reason we started with the cluster builder is because I wanted you to think about those measurements, right? The gap between the center stone and the halo stones, how far they should be from the center, whether or not they're tilted, um, overall shape of the halo, and having that builder at least get you in the right frame of mind that those are kind of things that you need to process. So we're going to start. I'm going to show you a round diamond. Let's do a 1 carat round. Put that in here, and again, this is just going to be the halo. We will talk about what happens on the profile, how the halo attaches to the band, in another video. Basically, you shouldn't have been given that job Friday or Saturday when I wasn't here, and I've talked to my dad about that, so we'll get that handled. Okay, so I'm going to start with a command that's essentially like the dupe border of gems. So, dupe border kind of shows you the outer portion. If you go to the second row of gems, this one that kind of looks like a bezel, it's called gem profile curve. It's basically would allow you to put a profile around your gem. It's like a really longhand way of making a bezel. You would never use it for that, but if you right click, you can see it puts the exact border around the girdle of your gem, regardless of shape. So for circle, it's not overly exciting because I also could have typed in circle, put the center here and make it 6.5 millimeters, right? Like that wouldn't have been that hard. But when you start getting into some other crazy shapes, like emerald cuts and pears and all that, it's going to be nice to have this border. So we're going to attack this just like we would the halo builder. So typically it's nice to have the stone start 0.2 millimeters away from the center. That gives you a little space for prong. And then what I like to do is offset a curve that's half the distance or half the diameter of a gem. So if I'm going to use 1.3 millimeters, I'm going to offset it 0.65. Does that make sense? I'm going to do it again. So essentially this gives me, this is the width of my gem, and this is the gem that I'm going to, or the curve that I'm going to use for gems on curve. So if you think about just this little portion, think of this as how you would set up a ring, right? And then if you were making a band, you would add like 0.15 to 0.2 millimeters to either end. So just because it's curved doesn't mean you don't have to think about a band. Basically, the only difference would be on a band, you can kind of start and stop it where you want. It needs to make a perfect circle. Always, always even numbers with very few exceptions, preferably divisible by 4. So I can F6 here, do gems on curve. So normally you're doing a band, so in this third finger view it would be shaped like this. So on halos you always want the culettes to face down, so they're straight up and down, unless of course they need to be at an angle, but we're not going to put them toward F4 for that. All right, so you're going to work here just like you would anything else. Mirror them around, make them 1.3 millimeters because that's basically the gap we put between here and here. Looks fantastic. We have a number that's divisible by 2 because these line up. We actually have a number divisible by 4 because these are also centered. Beautiful. I could lower my halo. It'll be a lot easier to raise this up 1 millimeter. And again, maybe even a hair more. You really want the girdle of the center diamond to be about 1 millimeter above the table of the halo stones. That is a rough rule. It is not always accurate, but 90% of the time that's what it's going to be. So if someone says put it to our standard height, that's what that's going to mean, give or take, a 1/10 of a millimeter or so. All right. So this line was 0.2 millimeters from the center stone. We always want our halo to tuck a little more under the center. So I'm going to bring it in at least 0.1, maybe 0.15 from there. So if you look, this gap is 0.3, this gap is 0.2. That's pretty much the only thing keeping me from using the channel builder as our cutter, basically the cutters to make my halo, because technically If you look at it this way, the stones are off center. They're not off center when you look at it with the stone, the center stone, but technically this is wider than this, and I don't want to have to make this extra wide to accommodate this piece. So let's say instead of straight up and down, these stones, I'm going to ungroup them, we're at an angle. What I would do, let's see how many are there. There's 16. I right click. So there's 16 gems. I would tilt one that's flat, obviously. So one that's either here or here, right? One that's so when something is flat against any of the planes, it's called the C plane. So basically, if you're looking through side view, it would be, this is your Y axis. If you're looking down, this is your wait, no, that's Y. This is X. This is Z. I don't know. Basically, flat on this major center point at one of the zeros, if you will. So I would rotate this. I still know it's 0.2 from the center because I just rotated on this inside. Just, until I like the way it looks. And then what I'm going to do, I'm not going to rotate copy, but I could. If I want things to be evenly spaced on a curve, I can use a command called array curve. So I'm going to have nothing highlighted. I'm going to type array. Curve is always CRV. Select the objects I'm arraying. Select what I'm copying is basically what that should say. All right, press enter when done. Select my path curve. You pretty much always want the center point curve. I could click either of these, but it tends to give you an uneven result, especially if the shape isn't round. So I'm going to select this. And you can see there's two ways I can control it. I can tell how many items and it'll evenly space them. I can give it a distance, in which case they're not going to be evenly spaced. They're going to be spaced to that distance. So let's look at what that looks like. So what's really cool is this will change. So if I put in, let's see. Now distance between items is a little deceptive because they're not talking here to here. They're talking here to the start of the next gem. So if I have 1.3s and there's about a 0.2 millimeter gap between them, I would put 1.5. So you can see it says that's going to give me 18 stones. But look, see how this end one is like overlapping that guy? But if I type array curve, select my curve, and come up here and do the 18, they're evenly spaced. Now they're way too close together. How do I know that? A new command I'm going to teach you. Distance. Select one point, select your second point, 0.133. It's not that bad, but it's really, we don't go any closer than 0.15. 0.15 is like, it's pushing it. So once I did 0.12 and it was a shit show for the jewelers. Everything was overlapping, stuff got chipped. So basically 0.15, if like that's already pushing it. We're going to select our curve. So I could put one less stone here, right? And make it 17, but that would not be an even number. And if at all possible, we want even numbers. 16. Even better, it's divisible by 4. So let's see what our distance is between these. If it's less than 0.35, we're not going to sweat it. It is 0.3. It's kind of a big gap, but it's better that it be an even number than it be 0.2 millimeters apart. That's a personal thing for me. It's better because, again, the prongs are centered between stones every time and they get to be even. But look what happened. To see how it stays at that perfect angle all the way around. They're all tilted. So we did that with the Halo builder by changing the angle. But this gave us a new way of doing array curve. There's also a command array polar that you might see pop up. It's essentially array curve, but in a circle, which is kind of helpful. The center would be 0. We'd want 16. See how I made it a perfect circle? That's great. Except when you're making an oval. So let's put in, so this is, was a 6.5 millimeter round. So for kicks, let's put in an oval that ends in 6.5 millimeters. So 6.5 by 4.5, okay? I'm gonna hide all this, pretend it doesn't exist. We're gonna do our gem outline. Right click, right? 0.2 to the gem, 0.65 to there, 0.65, right? 0.2. That's basically my halo. Look, same thing. Array curve. Let's try 16. They're a little close. Let's try 14. Looks really good. So you can see how basically I took the same thing, and look, that beautiful shape here. I would probably again lift this up just a little bit. But basically I got the same thing that I would have done in the gem builder. Okay, so here's when you're gonna ask me, Laura, why wouldn't I just use the gem builder? Like, give me an example of a time it would not work. Well, we actually looked at it, right, last time. So we looked at cushion-shaped halos, and we kind of talked about our shortcut, right, putting in a cushion-shaped gem. But remember how they didn't perfectly line up? Like there was like they were never at the corners. So I'm going to show you again. We can use kind of the same cheat sheet. So I don't know if you know this down here. You can control, so I can make something at 6.5, 6.5, and really that doesn't matter. I can do a 60% depth. Okay. If I want to get something cushiony, and then you know what, I could use that same trace and delete that, and now I have kind of a cushion shape. I don't know that that's cushiony enough, to be honest. Oh, 0.65. 0.65, 0.2. What happens as you start offsetting curves is that alteration becomes even less noticeable, right? Like it's starting to look really round out here. It's not really looking very cushiony. What I like to do, and it's not particularly easy, but it always looks nice, is I like to draw a straight line and rotate it 45 degrees and mirror it. And then what I'm going to do is make an arc. So basically I decide where I want my corner to be. So get this cutter here and bring it out to wherever you like your corner. Basically, as long as it's not here, you know it's going to have an archy shape, right? Because in order for it to be a straight line, you'd have to cut it there. So it can be anywhere you want. The cool thing is, since this line is perfectly at 45 degrees, we know that it's scaling 2 out, if that makes sense. So, so I would split these by this line. Okay, get rid of that, get rid of that. And then what I like to do, make sure this is flat, is make an arc from here to there. Okay. And then you can rotate, copy it. You could also mirror it. I'll show you both. So rotate, copy, 1, 2, 3, 4. I could also mirror from 0 like that, right? And then mirror from 0 like that. Whatever transformation makes the most sense in your mind. Now, when I go 0.65, 0.65, 0.2, it's a lot more cushiony square. Most people don't like a pointy edge. So what I'd probably do, I don't know if we've done fillet yet. Oh yeah, because we had the conversation, is it fillet or fillet? It's whatever you want it to be. It's 2 L's, I know that much. I would round this. So there's no right or wrong answer. The radius is basically at what distance from the corner it's going to start blending things. So we'll start with a small number, 0.2 here and here. This is first and second curve. That wasn't very impressive, so we'll undo. Let's do it again. Let's do a bigger number, 0.6 here to here. That's more impressive. All right, let's go to 1. That looks pretty good, right? And then, if you want, we can quad flip it. And then we know all 4 corners are exactly the same. And then offset, we're going to make our channel shape. That definitely looks more like most of the cushion-shaped halo rings that we've looked at. So cushion-shaped halo for round. Yeah, so you can see most of them have that, you know, this shape. That's definitely more in line with what we have going on here. It's not perfectly square with a rounded edge. It's still got a little arc, but not a ton. You know, it's not totally round. So that one's even a little more flat. This one has more of that arc. This one's a little flatter, but you know, that's definitely more in line with what most people are expecting. So now you can do one of two things. I can do gems on curve. Make sure they point down and put in my stone size. That actually works pretty well, right? It's not divisible. Oh, is it divisible by 4? 16. We couldn't have asked for better, right? But I like having a little more control over the gems, and you can definitely do that here with the Edit Gems on Curve more than the cluster builder that just kind of puts them in there. Also, let's go back, way back, when it was really square, okay? And the reason I didn't do 0.2 here, by the way, is because it doesn't need it to fit the prong. So with the cushion, I can definitely fit things much closer. So let's go to F6, gems on curve, cule it down, 1.3, mirror this all the way around. Do you see where things get weird when you have a pointier corner? So what I would do in this case, again, the cluster builder is not going to be our friend, is I would build one section. So basically make sure it goes from point to point. Find out what looks good, what gapping is nice, and then you're going to ungroup it because you don't need two of those. And you're going to rotate and copy them or mirror them, whatever that makes the most sense. So rotate, copy here to here. Kind of see what I'm doing here? Rotate, copy. And then mirror this over. There was probably a better way to do that. But you see how now I have something in every corner? We may not like this gap exactly, but you kind of get the idea, right? By handling this one section at a time, I can get something that lays out evenly across all four versus the cluster builder. It just put them there, and there's nothing, you know, you can really do about it from there. So that is our longhand halo. Everything else would follow exactly the same, right? Prongs, you can see that's really too big a gap, but basically that's how we were dealing with it today, because it wasn't really about this gap. It was about the concept of putting them on a curve. You can kind of see how you can play around with things a little more. So you would still put your prongs in like always. Maybe we make like some absurd prongs so they actually fill the space. Maybe we bring the nudge down to 10. Really, as long as they're between 10 and 30, you're fine. And then you would make this solid. I'd probably bring this in even like another 0.1. Again, I like to have a little extra on the interior. You can extrude your curves. We don't want them going both sides. We just want them coming down here. Fun fact, you can actually put in your distance you want it to extrude, but the number is indicative of direction as well. So what that means is if I type in 1.5, because the number was positive, it went up. But if I type negative 1.5, it went down below 0. And then I like to use, I think I showed it in the other video, this first head builder here, because I like having the angle of the prongs. So I would make the head shorter. Perfect. And then ungroup it. You don't need this guy. All right, so that's your longhand halo. The idea kind of stands for just about anything. Maybe you're doing a halo that's a crazy shape. I think we looked at some earlier. Usual halo. God, I can only imagine what's about to pop up. So like something like this with a crazy shape, or yeah, as you can see, this isn't even diamonds, that's just a shape itself. You can kind of get the idea how that would be great to do array polar or array curve, right? Build one of them and then have it circle around in an even number so that it looks nice. What I would do if it's a weird shape like this is a great example. This arc, I prefer to build things flat and then rotate it 45 degrees. So for example, remember how we were doing that line? Okay, and rotate 45 degrees, mirror it. I would basically build that shape here and then rotate it over. So it's like a circle and an arc. We're going to start it the same way we did the other one. Oop. We're going to split it. Make whatever shape you feel like you need, right? And then rotate this 45 degrees. You can mirror it. You could quad flip it, you know, whatever you want to do. Throw your gem in. So the reason I advise doing it flat is it's really hard to make sure things are centered when it's over here. But it's a lot easier to manipulate it when it's here. So like maybe you realize the shape isn't right after you rotate it back, and you know, scale 1D it or whatever you need to do. It's a lot easier to handle it here because when you quad flip from this point, this matches this. But once it's rotated 45 degrees, if you quad flip, this doesn't necessarily match this. You would actually need to put a cutter in and rotate the cutter 45 degrees, split it, and then mirror it across that line. Does that make sense? So my preference is to build everything like here or here, you know, at one of the quadrants, just for ease of being able to mirror things back and forth. So that's Longhand Halo. I promise the next videos will get into how to actually attach a halo to the engagement ring, how to make it cathedral up, and put a profile pattern.